I'm going to tell you a little trade secret here, okay? When Rabbit was really, really cheesed off at everybody, I turned him into Richard Nixon. Take a look, see? It was one of the great thrills of my life to be able to make Robin Williams laugh.
Yeah.
You know? You don't get those opportunities very often.
So I take it, Genie was probably your favorite to animate?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I think of all the Disney characters I've done, he was pretty good. Now, there's classic characters that I've done at Disney's too that also were great fun to animate. I loved animating the Three Caballeros for the Mexico Pavilion at Epcot. Yeah. I would work my requisite 8 hours at the studio. Go home, have dinner, help the kids with their homework. You know, my wife and I would compare notes because she worked there too. And when the kids were in bed, open up the work again, and then work at home. You know, for a few more hours until you could take it back in the morning. The other thing to bear in mind is how fast can you work. When you're skilled enough to be able to work quickly and confidently, then you can have more time to do your outside projects and things like that. You know, I mean, it's very difficult to do it when you're not facile enough to do it. And I don't mean to sound that in an insulting way. I'm just saying that the more experience you gain, the better off you will be, because then you'll know, oh, it'll take me about an hour and a half to do this set of drawings, and then I can do this over here. And life always intrudes on your plans. I mean, things always change. But, you know, there have been times in my career when I'm juggling half a dozen different projects all at once, and I'm still around. The downside is that you also have to be excellent and fast. So, you know, it's a kind of thing where that's really what the companies want, is people who can turn stuff around, you know, very efficiently, but at the highest quality level possible, you know. And that just comes with experience. I'm fortunate enough to be married to a woman who is also an animation artist. You know, my wife Susan is an art director.
She understands.
And so she understands. She's in the same boat I am. She has deadlines. Yeah. She totally gets it. So it's so much easier for the two of us, because we're already on the same wavelength. There are times on Pocahontas when Susan was in cleanup, and I know they'd be, you know, cranking for deadlines, so I'd take a few in-betweens and and do them. It's a kind of thing where we were fortunate enough during that picture to have Susan's mom out here in California. She could look after the kids a lot of the time, but you don't ever push them aside or anything like that. It was always very important for us to be, you know, involved with our kids, you know, in meaningful ways. And, you know, while sometimes deadlines beckon, the other thing you can do is trade off. You know, it's a kind of thing where if I don't have to work late one night, I'll come home and then Susan can crank the deadlines, you know, and so on and so forth. So it's a balancing act. You know, there's no one formula for it. It's often very difficult, especially when you're directing a feature, because you have unseen forces changing the ground plane you're working on every single time. You have, you know, a Jeffrey Katzenberg coming in saying, throw out that sequence, board it again, and by the way, I want to see it in 2 days, you know? So it's a kind of thing where you have to be able to cope with that, and you learn not just how you do it yourself, but also how you can delegate that to the people on whom you rely. You know, so you would get your best board artists, you know, and say, okay, this is the brief, this is what we need to do, you know, and turn it around. That's really the best advice I can offer you. It's never easy, and animation is always a labor-intensive process, no question. And you don't get into it unaware of that. Let's put it that way. You're always aware that that is going to be part and parcel of your life. You know, there are rewards, though. I mean, for all the hard hours you put in, you know, when you can see something on the big screen and have people respond to it, that's magic. To know that you're touching people, whether you're making them laugh or you're making them cry or making them feel something, and they've never met you before, they have no idea who you are, but your work is doing that for them. That's huge. That is really huge. And as a family, your kids grow up with that. Your kids and your spouse know how far-reaching that work is, you know. And often we would bring our kids in on the process. I'd bring story reels home and have my kids watch it and get comments from them, and they would absolutely feel like they were involved, and they were. You know, I mean, if we're making films that are partially for children, then you may as well have children react to them and see what they think, you know. And so that was always great, and I knew if my kids laughed, okay, that joke works, you know. So it's a kind of thing, you know, and they got to be pretty good little film critics after a while, you know. So, you know, try pitching your kids a sequence once in a while and seeing how they respond. You know, kids are very quick. You know, they pick up on details and things very, very, very quickly. So it's often quite inspiring to see how they react to things, you know, and they'll often pull something out of left field that you hadn't thought of at all. You know, why is this character doing this when blank, blank, blank? It's like, why didn't I think of that?
Do you have any examples of your kids actually doing that?
I'm trying to think of some now.
No, Dad, that doesn't work.
Man, I'm trying to think of it. I know there have been instances, and I'm coming up dry here, but certainly there have been instances where often it's in a story reel where I would know that something isn't working, and they'd pick up on it.
I see.
And I'd say, well, it's interesting you said that because...
It's like support.
Yeah, it's support, you know. And often, no matter what audience you're showing stuff to, there's safety in numbers. The more people who look at a reel and say, that's not working.
Yeah.
You know that if 20 people tell you that, okay, better change that.
It's not an outlier.
You know, it's clear that it's not going to be flying because several people have already told you it's not flying. You know, and sometimes they can be kids, and sometimes they can be your peers, and sometimes they can be, you know, anybody. The other thing is, a good idea can come from anywhere. You know, it doesn't matter if your title is director or your title is, you know, cleanup artist or your title is you know, coffee lady. A good idea can come from anywhere. Jeffrey used to have sessions with the animators when he was at Disney's, where not only he'd want to punch up gags, but also, you know, look at the reels and see how he could how things could be plus.
Sure.
So on Aladdin, okay, one of the things that the Genie talked about in his complaint about being the Genie,
right,
was, you know, fantastic cosmic powers. Okay. So we're watching the last reels of Aladdin, and Aladdin has tricked Jafar to turn into a genie.
Right.
Okay, so he can trap him in the lamp. So Tom Cito great story artist and was also an animator on the Genie, comes up with this great idea. Says, as this sequence is happening, he says, we'll have Aladdin say, you wanted to be a genie, you got it. And everything that comes with it. Phenomenal cosmic powers, and then he shrinks down into the lamp. And he puts the lid back on top of the lamp. And that just came from somebody who was on the crew.
Yeah.
He's not a high-paid writer, he's an animator, he's a story guy, but it wound up in the movie.
Yeah.
And those kinds of things are great. You know, it's a great network to have when you're working with creative people. You know, I remember when out in the Oasis, you know, the genie's trying to come up with a mode of transportation. He's transforming Abu into lots of, let's see, what do you need? What do you need? What do you need? And, you know, Rasul Lazadani, who is our head of layout, said, why don't you turn him into a car? And we cracked up. We cracked up. So for, you know, about 16 frames, he's an auto with fins, you know? We just thought it was the funniest damn thing. You know, yes, we're trying to think of some mode of transportation. What would that be? Why don't you turn him into a car? And so we put it in, you know. That's just part of the gold of working with people who are very creative and you know, attuned to that.